The night before the party, my daughter looked at my dress with a mixture of embarrassment and fear, as if my presence alone could shatter something fragile she was trying to build. She whispered, "Mama, people like them don't wear things like that." But when I walked into that glittering room anyway, her eyes found mine, and she collapsed before she could utter another word. My name is Alina Brooks, 52 years old, a widow who works long hours at a small-town bakery. My daughter Grace has been climbing into a world far above what either of us ever imagined. Scholarships, internships, friends with polished smiles and expensive shoes. I thought success would make her happier, but instead she grew quieter, more careful with her words, as though she were trying to outrun the life she came from. When she told me not to attend her mentor's annual winter gala, something in her tone, brittle, rehearsed, told me there was more fear than shame behind her request. Grace leaves early for the gala, dressed in silver silk and borrowed diamonds. Alina watches from the window as a man in a black car picks her up, his hand on Grace's back too familiar, too guiding. The house feels hollow after they leave, every ticking sound amplified in the empty rooms. Hours pass before Alina's unease forces her to get ready and go anyway. With the dress folded neatly over her arm, she wonders. Who exactly didn't want her there? The thrift shop smelled faintly of cedar and old winters. Dust floated in slow spirals, catching the weak afternoon light as though the sun itself were tired. I lifted the navy blue dress from the rack with both hands, careful the way you'd cradle something fragile and half-forgotten. The fabric was soft, worn in the way clothes only get when someone once loved them well. For a moment, standing in that quiet aisle, I felt a warmth rise in my chest, the memory of gentler years, when a simple dress and a simple life were enough. I folded it against me, imagining the look on Grace's face when she saw it. Maybe she'd laugh, maybe she'd roll her eyes, maybe she'd take a picture and tease me about how I always choose things with history stitched into them, but none of those guesses came close to the real thing. When I stepped into her room later that evening, the dress draped over my arm, she was sitting at her desk, adjusting an earring with that delicate precision she'd learned from living in a world I still didn't quite understand. Golden light from her lamp traced the side of her face, giving her an almost porcelain stillness. "Grace," I said softly, "look what I found for the gala." She turned, slow and distracted, the way someone wakes from a dream they don't want to explain. Her eyes dropped to the dress, and something, I still don't know what, flickered across her expression. A shadow of recognition, maybe, or fear. Then her whole body seemed to still, as though a cold draft had swept through her bones. For a heartbeat she didn't speak, then she smiled, a tight, stretched thing that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh," she said, voice too bright, "Mama, it's pretty, really, it's just—" Her fingers fluttered, searching for a place to land. "The gala's very formal, black tie. Everyone will be in gowns, real gowns. I don't want you to feel out of place." Her tone was rehearsed. That was what struck me first. Not the words, but the way she delivered them, smooth on the outside, cracked on the inside. I laughed lightly, trying to soften the air. "Grace, it's not a competition, I just want to be there. This dress is good enough for me." But she didn't relax. Not even a little. Instead, she stepped closer, reached out, and touched the fabric with the tip of one trembling finger. It was such a small gesture, but I felt it like a shiver under my skin. She whispered, "Mama, maybe you shouldn't come. It's complicated." "Complicated how?" She looked past me, toward the window, as if the night outside might offer her an excuse. "People at the gala, they're very particular. It's a certain image. I don't want them to get the wrong impression of you." "Of you, not of us." The bruise formed right then, invisible, quiet but deep. I didn't push. I've lived long enough to know when someone is balancing on the edge of a truth they're afraid to speak. So I folded the dress neatly, smoothing the fabric with my palm, the way I used to smooth her hair when she was small. "Well," I murmured, "the dress made me think of you when you were little. Remember that blue Sunday school ribbon you wore until it fell apart?" She didn't smile at the memory, though once she would have. Instead, she blinked rapidly and stepped back. "I have to finish getting ready. Let's talk later, okay?" But we both knew later wouldn't come. I left her room quietly, carrying the dress pressed to my chest. The hallway felt longer than it ever had, each step echoing a message I didn't want to read. I hung the dress on the bedroom door, letting it sway gently in the draft. It looked harmless there, soft, simple, ordinary. But I knew better now. Something about it terrified my daughter, not in the way people fear ugliness or embarrassment. No, this was something older, deeper. The kind of fear that comes from wanting to hide a part of yourself so badly you'd rather cut it off entirely. I sat on the edge of the bed, the house hushed around me, and let my thoughts drift to every moment Grace had shifted away from home, inch by inch. The calls that grew shorter, the polite tone she used when mentioning her mentor, the photos she'd taken places where I didn't belong, every tiny distance had seemed harmless then, natural, even. But now they fit together like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't realized I'd been assembling all along. I replayed her face in my mind, that pale flicker, that startled inhale, that tremble in her voice. Panic, not judgment. So what was she afraid of? What did the dress bring back? Or what did it reveal? I stood and walked back to the door, running my fingers over the dress one more time. The fabric was cool, like something waiting for an answer. It shouldn't have mattered this much, but it did. Because fear leaves fingerprints, even when the hands never touch you. And hers were all over the air between us. As I turned off the light, the house settled with a soft groan, as though it had been listening the whole time. The dress hung there in the dark, a quiet witness, a silent mirror. And somewhere deep inside my chest, a small voice I hadn't heard in years whispered, "Something is wrong. She's hiding something." I lay awake long after midnight, the moonlight slipping through the curtains like a thin blade. I kept seeing Grace's eyes, the way they darted away from mine, the way they filled with something that looked too much like grief. A dress shouldn't scare a daughter, a mother shouldn't feel like a secret, and a simple evening shouldn't feel like the beginning of a storm. But there I was, staring at the ceiling, already knowing that whatever frightened my daughter was coming for both of us. And this dress, this soft navy blue thing I had chosen with love, was somehow at the center of it. What was she hiding from, and why did it feel like the truth was about to find us both? I found the dress again the next morning where I'd left it, draped over the back of the kitchen chair like someone sitting with their back turned to me. The winter light coming through the window was thin and gray, but it softened the navy blue fabric, made it look almost elegant. The kind of simple, dignified dress you wear when you don't want to make a scene, just quietly belong in a room. My coffee had gone cold by the time I realized I'd done nothing but stare at it for 10 minutes, listening to the old house breathe around me. The night before kept replaying in my mind. Grace's face when she saw it, the way all the color drained, then rushed back in too fast. I tried to tell myself I'd imagined it. That grief and age and loneliness had made me see things that weren't there. But I'd raised that girl. I knew the way her mouth tightened when she lied. I knew the tremor in her fingers when she was trying not to show she was afraid. I picked up the dress and ran my thumb along one of the seams. Someone had done the stitching by hand. Tiny, patient work. The inside tag was faded, no brand, just a size half rubbed out. It smelled faintly of old perfume and lavender soap, the kind my own mother used to keep in drawers to keep moths away. I wondered who had worn it before me. I wondered why Grace looked at it like a ghost. The front door opened and closed with a soft thud. Her footsteps came down the hallway, quick, efficient, the sound of heels that did not belong in this small, tired house. She appeared in the kitchen in a cloud of expensive perfume and cold air, her beige coat cinched tight around her slim waist. "Mom, you're not ready yet," she said, even before she took her gloves off. "We don't have all day." "I told you the traffic is." Her eyes landed on the dress in my hands. The rest of the sentence dissolved. For a heartbeat, she just stood there, pupils widening, lips parting without sound. It was the same look she'd had yesterday, only rawer in the morning light, before she could hide it behind makeup and practice smiles. I tried to make my voice light. "Good morning to you too." She blinked, swallowed, then forced a laugh that didn't belong in this kitchen. "Morning, Mom. I didn't think you'd actually keep that." She nodded toward the dress like it was something half-rotten left on the counter. "I like it," I said quietly. "It's simple, it fits, and it was $10. Can't do much better than that." Her eyes flicked to my face, then away. $10, she repeated, like it tasted bad. She set her purse on the table, carefully, like she needed something solid to touch. The leather looked wrong next to the chipped plates and faded tablecloth. She slipped out of her coat, revealing the sleek cream blouse and pencil skirt underneath, the kind of outfit that didn't know what it meant to be patched at the elbows. "This is that kind of event, Mom," she said. "It's a charity gala. There'll be donors, photographers, press. It's not just some small town banquet. I smoothed the fabric over my arm. You said formal dress, it's a dress. She sighed through her nose, hands going to her hips, then dropping, then folding. That's not the point. Then what is the point? I asked softly. She hesitated, words crowding behind her lips, then finally pushed one out like it hurt. That dress, it looks like something for poor people. The room went very still. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked. Outside, a dog barked 2 streets over. Inside me, something slow and heavy slid into place. Not anger, exactly. Not yet, just a kind of quiet understanding that felt worse. So what am I, Grace? I asked, my voice calm. Somebody else. She winced, eyes closing for a second. You know I didn't mean it like that, she said quickly. I just mom these people, they notice everything. They'll know it secondhand, they'll see the seams. I don't want them thinking. Thinking what? I prompted when she stalled. That I come from, she gestured vaguely at the room. This. There it was, not said outright, but laid between us like a second-hand dishcloth. I let the words sit for a moment. They had a smell to them. Old shame reheated. You did come from this, I said quietly. From this table. From these floors. From dresses I patched in this very kitchen so you could have new ones. The color rose in her cheeks, a flush of guilt and frustration. I know, she said, and I'm grateful, okay, you know I am. But you don't understand how things work there. Eric's family, the board, the donors, they already think I'm some rescue project he picked up out of nowhere. I'm just trying not to give them more ammunition. Is that what I am now? I asked, ammunition. She scrubbed a hand over her face like she could erase the last 30 seconds. Mom, please, she whispered. Just let me handle this. Wear the other dress. The one we bought last year for the company dinner. It's still nice. That dress doesn't fit anymore, I said. You know that. Besides, I thought you said you wanted me to feel comfortable. I do, she insisted. Just comfortable in something that won't make them look at you like. She stopped herself, but the sentence was already finished in the space between us. Like I don't belong. I could have told her then about all the rooms I'd been in where I didn't belong. The offices where I cleaned floors at night, while executives walked past without seeing me. The parent-teacher conferences where my thrift store coat smelled faintly of bleach, because I'd come straight from work. The church socials where people asked where my husband was less out of concern and more out of curiosity, like I was a puzzle missing a piece. But I didn't. Instead, I set the dress gently on the table and stepped closer. What are you really afraid of, Gracie? I asked, using the name I hadn't in years. Her eyes flicked up sharply at that, then softened. She opened her mouth, closed it, then looked down at her hands. That's when I saw it, the faint tremor, not from annoyance, from fear. She turned away, busying herself with straightening a stack of mail that didn't need straightening. I just want everything to be perfect, she said too quickly. That's all. Perfect? A word we'd never had much use for in this house. From where I stood, I could see her phone screen light up on the table, a message preview flashing before it dimmed again. Unknown number, remember what we talked about. Make sure she doesn't embarrass him tonight. Her hand darted to flip the phone over, screen down. For a moment, she forgot I could read upside down. The silence thickened. That from Eric. I asked, keeping my voice even. She froze, then forced a little laugh that sounded like it belonged to someone else. It's just work stuff, she said. You know, last-minute planning. Does your work usually talk about me? I asked. Her shoulders slumped a fraction. Mom, please, not today. Her voice cracked on the last word. I looked at my daughter, the one who once wore shoes with holes in the soles, because she refused to let me buy new ones until I'd bought myself a decent coat. The one who had cried in a grocery store aisle at 13, because I couldn't afford both her friend's birthday gift and the light bill. And she'd told me she didn't need friends that bad anyway. Now she wouldn't let me wear a $10 dress because someone might see the seams. I felt something ache for her then, beyond my own bruised pride. The kind of ache you get when you see someone you love strangling themselves with the rope they think will pull them higher. I picked up the dress again, letting the fabric fall between my fingers. Well, I said softly, it's a good thing I've been embarrassing people my whole life. I've had practice. She looked up startled. Mom. I'll be there, I said, in this dress. Because my daughter invited me to celebrate her future, and that's bigger than someone else's opinion of my hemline. She shook her head, eyes shining now, tears she refused to let fall. You don't understand what they can do, she whispered. Then maybe, I replied, it's time I found out. A horn sounded outside, a short, sharp burst. The car's here, she murmured, glancing away, swallowing everything she didn't say. She grabbed her purse, her coat, her composure. At the door she paused, one hand on the knob, the other clutching her phone like a lifeline. Please, she said, not turning around. Just don't be late. I looked at the dress, at the worn but carefully stitched seams, at the faint trace of someone else's perfume. At a life shaped by making do and still standing. I won't be, I answered. When the door closed behind her, the house exhaled. I held the dress up against my body, seeing my reflection in the dark window. For the first time in a long time, I didn't see a woman who had less. I saw a mother who had survived enough to walk into any room and keep her head high. Still, her words clung like smoke. A dress for poor people. I ran my hand along the fabric one more time, feeling every stitch, every mended place. If this was what poor looked like, quiet, steady, unafraid of being seen, then maybe the richest people in that room tonight weren't the ones I'd be walking past. I laid the dress carefully across the bed, the decision already made somewhere deep before my mind could argue. Whatever waited at that party, whatever Grace was so afraid of, I would face it in the only thing I'd ever truly owned in this life. My own skin, my own story, and a simple navy blue dress no one else wanted. Somewhere beneath all of that, a small, sharp question pressed against my ribs. The house was still when I woke, the kind of quiet that feels stitched into the walls as though nothing inside dared breathe before I did. A pale band of light pressed against the curtains, not enough to warm the room, but just enough to reveal the dust drifting lazily across the air. I sat up slowly, feeling the weight of the party still hanging somewhere behind my ribs. Grace's trembling voice, the warning buried in her smile, the dress lying folded like a question on the chair. I thought making coffee might steady me. It didn't. By the time the kettle clicked off, I was already in the hallway, drawn by something older than logic, something that whispered in the bones of a mother who had been left out of too much. I found myself standing in front of the cedar chest tucked beneath the window, the one filled with pieces of my life I didn't like to open too often. Wedding programs, old birthday cards, dried-up pens from school fundraisers, and photographs that never made it to frames. I lifted the lid. The smell rose up, cedar and dust, time and paper. I pushed aside the envelopes until I reached a familiar stack of glossy prints bound with a thinning elastic band. Grace as a baby, Grace in her first school play. Grace at 13, sunburnt and grinning, holding a fishing rod twice her size. Ordinary moments caught in ordinary light. But halfway through the stack, a color caught my eye, a smear of navy blue. I pulled the photograph free, expecting it to be one of the few pictures of me, back when life still fit neatly into small boxes. Instead, it wasn't me at all, it was a girl in the same navy blue dress. Only younger, much younger. She stood in what looked like a narrow hallway, her back pressed flat against the wall, eyes wide and terrified. Her hands clutched the dress at her sides, as though trying to pull it away from her own skin. In the corner of the picture, blurred by motion, was a man's hand reaching toward her. I felt my breath leave me. All at once, the kitchen melted away and the years I'd been carrying collapsed into the center of my chest. Who was she? Who took this? And how did it end up in my house? The room tilted slightly, the wood grain on the floor blurring before it snapped back into place. My fingers trembled as I flipped the photograph over. On the back, in a handwriting that curled delicately around each letter, were 3 words. Grace can't know. The kettle popped again behind me, the metal cooling with a soft tick. Outside, a car passed on the road, ordinary sounds, but the world inside the 4 walls had shifted entirely. My heart tapped slowly, painfully. The girl was about Grace's height now, her age now, even. But the picture felt older, like it had been carried a long time. The edges were worn, the colors slightly faded. And that dress, the same dress sitting in my bedroom, draped carefully like a sleeping thing, looked newer in the photograph than it did hanging in my house. I sat down on the floor without meaning to, the photograph resting on my knee. The light from the window caught on the glossy surface, making her eyes shine too brightly, as though she were about to cry. "Who are you?" I whispered. The walls didn't answer, but something inside me did, a cold certainty settling into my bones. Grace's fear hadn't been about appearances, not about shame, not about money, it had been about memory, recognition, history. And whatever history belonged to this dress, it had teeth. I placed the photograph on the floor beside me and reached again into the cedar chest, searching for any other clue. My fingers grazed old receipts, yellowed letters, a broken necklace chain, a creased map from a trip we never took, but nothing else remotely connected to the dress. Nothing else that carried that same sense of wrongness. Just this single photograph, tucked between memories that had nothing to do with it, which meant someone placed it there. Recently, I closed the chest carefully and sat back against the wall, legs folded, staring at the girl in the picture. There was something about her eyes, dark, frightened, but with a flicker of defiance buried deep. A flicker I recognized not because of her face, but because I had seen that same fire in Grace once. When she was 9, a boy pushed her on the playground. She came home with scraped knees and a furious determination to go right back outside so she could tell him she didn't bleed easily. She had been brave, stubborn, unyielding even in fear, but when she saw the dress yesterday, her courage had vanished, wind chased from her body, and now here was a girl, wearing the same dress, trapped in a moment someone had felt the need to photograph. My stomach twisted. I heard the front door open and close, light footfalls, quick, private. Grace had a way of entering a room without letting the air shift too much. It was a habit learned from years of trying not to disturb things. Mom. Her voice called from the hallway, "You up?" I slipped the photograph under my leg without thinking, my instincts moving faster than my mind. She appeared in the doorway, hair neatly pinned, makeup already done, blouse pressed. But her eyes kept flicking to my hands, to the cedar chest behind me, to the quiet disarray around me. "What are you doing?" she asked carefully. "Just looking through old things," I said. She nodded slowly, but her shoulders tightened. "Good," she said, but her voice wavered. "Good, just don't go digging too much today, okay? I want tonight to go smoothly." She stepped toward me, offering her hand to help me up. I took it, forcing my face into something that looked like acceptance. "You okay, Mom?" she asked. I looked at her, at the daughter who once told me everything, at the woman who now hid her fear behind expensive perfume and tight smiles, at the child who had begged me never to keep secrets from her. "I'm fine," I lied. She nodded, relieved. But as she turned toward the kitchen, I slipped the photograph deeper into my sleeve. Her voice trailed back to me as she busied herself with the kettle. "You remember the gala's at 8, right? Don't be late." I pressed my fingers against the hidden photograph, feeling the ridged edges. "I won't be," I said softly. But inside, the question pulsed like a heartbeat. Why was my daughter so terrified of a dress? And the girl who wore it before her? Why did a piece of fabric terrify my daughter more than the thought of me not being there at all? The afternoon sun drifted through the lace curtains in thin, tired stripes, landing across the navy dress, still hanging on the back of my bedroom door. I had tried twice to put it away, but both times my hands stopped just short of touching it. Something about the fabric, the faint scent of lavender soap and thyme, made the room feel smaller, as if the walls wanted to lean in and listen. I kept glancing back at the photograph hidden beneath the sweater in my drawer, its edges already warm from my fingers. The girl's frightened eyes felt stitched into the back of mine. And Grace, my daughter, had floated through breakfast like a ghost wearing her own skin, insisting everything was fine, insisting that I just follow the plan. Except I didn't know the plan. Not really. I only knew what fear looked like on her face, and I hadn't seen that expression since she was a child. The clock on the wall ticked loud and slow, a patient heartbeat, waiting for something to break. And then the phone rang. It was the kind of ring that didn't belong in a quiet house, sharp and demanding, cutting through everything. I walked toward it, each step dragging more weight than the last. My fingers trembled as I lifted the receiver. "Hello." Static at first, then a soft inhale, then nothing. "Grace?" I asked, though I knew it wasn't her. More static, a faint hiss like someone exhaling through clenched teeth. I almost hung up. But then a voice came through. Not Grace's, a man's, smooth, steady, too polite to be comforting. "Mrs. Dalton," he said, "Grace is occupied." My breath caught. "Occupied?" I repeated. "Yes," he said, the words stretched thin. "She's preparing for this evening. It's a very important night. We appreciate your cooperation." Cooperation. The word landed cold. I gripped the edge of the table, the wood biting into my palm. Let me talk to my daughter. A quiet pause, long enough to be intentional. Then a sound, not the man, not the static, a stifled sob, small, muffled, like someone trying hard not to be heard. Grace, I whispered. The man cleared his throat. There's no need for dramatics, Mrs. Dalton. She'll call you when she's ready. She just did, I said, voice shaking now. And she's not ready, she's scared. A slight chuckle, it wasn't warm. You're reading too much into things. Am I said, clutching the phone tighter. Because she sounded. And then I heard it again. A gasping breath, a hitched inhale, a quiet, trembling sound that wasn't meant for me. I knew my daughter's fear the way I knew my own reflection. The man's voice returned, sterner this time. She has a lot on her plate today. Big events can overwhelm even the strongest of brides. This wasn't overwhelm, I whispered. That was fear. Silence on the line, the kind of silence that confesses without speaking. Then, a click. The call cut off. I stood there, holding the dead receiver, listening to the dial tone buzzing like an angry bee. The room seemed to bend around the sound, the edges of the wallpaper blurring as I tried to steady myself. I set the phone down slowly, the way one handles something fragile or dangerous. My chest felt too tight for breath. My thoughts ran in loops, jagged and frantic. Why wouldn't Grace speak? Why was a stranger answering her phone? And why did he sound like someone who believed she belonged to him? The kettle clicked on by itself. I had nudged the switch in passing. The water began to hum, then boil, steam curling into the air like thin smoke. The sound filled the room, soft and relentless. I leaned on the counter, trying to let the warmth steady me. It didn't. Instead, my eyes drifted to the navy dress again. It seemed darker in this light. Heavier. As though it carried a gravity all its own. Grace's voice from the night before echoed in my memory, the tremble she tried to swallow, the smile that didn't quite stay in place. A dress for poor people. Not disdain, not embarrassment. No, something else entirely. Panic. The kettle hissed, a high whine slicing through my thoughts. I shut it off quickly, gripping the handle so tightly the metal dug into my palm. Something was happening in my daughter's life, something she couldn't say, couldn't show, couldn't send in an email or a text or a phone call. But she had tried to speak, just now in that choked, muffled sob. A plea buried beneath fear. I poured water into a mug, watching the tea unfurl its color like a bruise blooming under skin. My hand shook just enough to make the surface ripple. Grace was in danger, that much I knew now. But from whom? And why was she so desperate to keep me away? A faint movement caught my eye. The photograph, half slipped from the drawer where I'd hidden it, lay crooked, the girl's frightened face peeking out as though she had been watching. Watching me. Warning me. I sat down at the table, the mug between my palms, and pulled the photograph fully into the light. The girl stared back at me with the same wide-eyed terror I'd seen in Grace's eyes last night. Same dress. Same fear. Same shadow reaching. And then, as if the universe wanted to draw a straight line between the past and the present, my phone buzzed on the table. A text, from an unknown number. 2 words only, don't interfere. My hand went cold around the mug. The steam rose between my fingers like a silent threat. I stared at the screen. The words didn't explain anything, but they confirmed everything. Someone was watching, someone who knew about the dress. The photograph, the call, and someone who believed I could be warned away with 2 words. I exhaled slowly, setting the mug aside. They didn't know me. They didn't know what mothers were built of. The room felt different then, not smaller but sharper. As though the air itself understood that something had shifted inside me. I stood, smoothing my palms down my jeans, and pulled the dress gently from the back of the door. Navy blue. Hand-stitched, worn soft by time. And by fear. I held it up to the window, letting the morning sun pass through the fabric. Its shadow stretched across the floor, long and trembling. A shadow like a warning. A shadow like a promise. I folded the dress carefully, pressing it against my chest. Grace might not be able to speak, but I could, and I would. I slipped the photograph into my pocket, closed the curtains, and walked toward the door with a steadiness that surprised even me. If someone didn't want me near my daughter, then that was exactly where I was going, and whatever waited for me at that gala, I would face it. For the day after the phone call, the house felt strangely hollow. Not silent, hollow. as if every room had swallowed its own breath and was waiting for something to happen. I moved through it slowly, aimlessly, touching the backs of chairs, smoothing out blankets, opening and closing drawers I didn't need anything from. It was an old habit of mine. When fear clawed at me, my hands pretended the world was still orderly. By noon, the tea kettle had whistled twice more, untouched both times. I finally poured the water out, watching steam rise and dissolve into the air, a little ghost slipping from my grasp. Then my phone buzzed. A single ping, soft, unassuming. A message from an unfamiliar name. Hannah D. Grace had mentioned her once, briefly, in a text months ago. One of the bridesmaids. The sweet one, she'd said. The one who made her laugh. I opened the message. Mrs. Dalton, I'm sorry to message you out of nowhere, but I saw you looked at my story and I think you should know something. My thumb hovered above the keyboard, as my stomach tightened. I typed slowly, choosing each word like stepping stones over a deep river. I'm listening. The typing bubble appeared almost instantly. Stopped, started again, stopped. Then a longer message arrived, the kind written in a rush before courage could evaporate. Grace isn't okay. She hasn't been okay for a long time. They don't let her do anything without them. She's monitored. Every call, every text. Every step. My breath caught, the phone suddenly too heavy in my hand. Another message followed. She told us she wanted to postpone the wedding. She was crying. They shut that down quick. My fingers tightened around the phone until the casing creaked. I sank into the chair by the window, the one with the cushion she picked out years ago, lilac fabric, fraying slightly at the edges. It felt like sitting in a memory. Who shut it down? I typed, a long pause then. His mother and his uncle, they run everything, money, business, even him. I read the words 3 times, each pass colder than the last. Outside, the street lay still, wind pushing brown leaves across the pavement like quiet messengers. Some part of me wished the world outside would howl, roar, break open, something to match the storm rising inside my chest. But everything stayed quiet, too quiet. Hannah sent another message, shorter, shakier. She's scared to tell you anything. She thinks it'll make things worse for you. That stopped me. A heavy, unfamiliar kind of hurt bloomed in my ribs. For me, I typed, more typing. Then, they told her they could ruin you financially if she made trouble. Lawsuits, false claims, connections in high places. My pulse drummed deep and low, a quiet echo in my ears. Grace had always been gentle, the kind of girl who apologized when someone else bumped into her. She'd grown up soft, sheltered, believing the world had more kindness than cruelty. And now she was caught in a cage she didn't know how to name. I typed, "Why are you telling me this?" The reply came quickly this time, because she won't, and because someone has to. A picture followed. A candid one, the kind taken behind the scenes of wedding preparations. Mismatched slippers, half-done hair, forgotten mascara smudges. Grace sat in a chair, head bowed, hands in her lap. Her wrists looked tense. Her shoulders curled inward. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused, like someone trying very hard not to vanish. In the background, blurred but visible, stood a woman with a severe expression, a hand resting on the back of Grace's chair in a way that was meant to look affectionate but felt like ownership. I swallowed hard. If anything happens to me, give these to Mama when she stops crying. The line from the photograph in my drawer echoed back to me, unwanted and familiar. My phone buzzed again. Mrs. Dalton. Yes, I typed. You need to be here. Those words sat still on the screen, heavy as granite. If you care about her. You need to be here. I reread them until the letters blurred, until the edges of the text softened like wet ink. In the window's reflection, my face looked older than I remembered, not in years, but in the way worry settles deep. The air felt too thin. I stood slowly, the way one rises before they faint. My hand drifted to the back of the door, where the navy dress still hung. The fabric looked calmer now, less like a warning and more like an invitation. A quiet invitation, a plea, from my daughter, even if she couldn't speak it herself. The house creaked behind me as I pulled the dress from the hanger. The sound reminded me of the nights Grace used to tiptoe into my room after nightmares, whispering, "Did I wake you?" Even though both of us knew she had. I folded the dress carefully across my arm, as though it carried her heartbeat. Then I typed one final message to Hannah, "Tell me where." She replied instantly, sending an address pinned on a map, a sprawling estate just outside the city. The dot blinked on the screen like a pulse. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in one hand, dress in the other. Somewhere across the state, my daughter's laughter had been replaced by silence, her choices replaced by threats, her joy replaced by caution. And someone with money, power, and a cold, steady voice, believed they could scare a mother into staying away. But fear doesn't work on mothers, not when their children are hurting. Not when danger shadows their smiles, not when someone else's hand has shaped their tears. I slid the dress into my suitcase, tucked the photograph beneath it, and zipped the bag slowly, sealing the past, preparing for the truth. When I stood, the room steadied beneath my feet. I wasn't shaking anymore. I walked to the front door, paused, and looked once at the empty house, the quiet kitchen, the folded blankets, the chair by the window. Then I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stepped into the afternoon air with a certainty I hadn't felt in years. My daughter needed me, and I was coming. Her. The road to the estate wound like a long, quiet vein through pine and winter-stripped oak. I drove it slowly, the tires crunching over gravel that hadn't seen many strangers. The sky above felt heavy, not storm-heavy, just the kind that sits low enough to make you feel watched. My hands stayed tight on the wheel, even though I'd already passed the point where turning around might have made sense. Grace's pinned location blinked on the GPS screen like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. When I reached the crest of the hill, the mansion came into view, all stone, shadow, and money. Not the warm kind of wealth with laughter and soft lights in the windows. The cold kind. With pillars like guards and windows that didn't let you see inside. The kind of house that doesn't welcome you. It endures you. Security cars lined the curved driveway like obedient soldiers. Men in black coats stood every few feet, hands tucked behind their backs, eyes scanning every movement like they were trained to calculate threats, even in ordinary things. Even in people like me. I parked far down the road, half hidden by a cluster of winter-bare trees. The air had that brittle cold that makes you aware of your own breathing. I sat there for a long minute, watching as guests arrived, polished shoes, shimmering gowns, confident laughter rising into the stillness. Every face I saw carried the certainty of belonging. None of them looked upward. None of them looked at the windows. But I did, and that's when I saw her. High up, second floor, third window from the left. A pale figure standing still, too still, framed by cream curtains. Her wedding dress hung on her like it was wearing her, not the other way around. Shoulders tight, spine rigid. Chin lifted the way you lift it, only when you're trying very hard not to cry. Her eyes were red even from that distance. I pressed my hand to my mouth. My breath fogged the glass of the car window, distorting her for a moment, then clearing, bringing her right back into painful focus. She wasn't looking at the people arriving. She wasn't looking at herself in the mirror. She was looking out, far out, toward the road, toward me, as if her heart knew before her eyes did. She blinked, and a single tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it. And God help me, that small act, not wiping a tear, broke something inside me. Because Grace had always been the kind of girl who cleaned herself up quickly, who hid hurt even from herself. But she let that tear fall. She needed someone, and no one inside that house was going to be that person. I straightened, letting the weight of the moment settle into me like stones in my pockets. I knew then that whatever this place was, whatever power her fiancé's family believed they had, none of it would keep me from her. Not today. I waited until a catering van approached the gate, white with faded lettering and back doors half-latched. When it slowed for security, I stepped out of my car, pulled the navy coat tighter around me, and walked quickly toward the rear of the van. The cold bit my cheeks. My breath fogged in the air like clouds trailing a small, determined storm. A young man jumped down from the van, arms loaded with boxes of glassware. He didn't see me until I was almost beside him. "Ma'am." "I'm late," I whispered, lifting the tray I'd grabbed from the open door before he noticed. "They told me to help with the flower setup." I said it the way women my age say things that aren't to be questioned, with tired eyes, and a tone that implies we've been up since dawn, and don't have the patience to explain ourselves to anyone. The young man blinked, shrugged, nodded, and just like that, I was inside the gate. Security barely glanced at me. A middle-aged woman in a plain coat carrying flowers was hardly a threat to the machinery of wealth and power humming around them. I followed the other staff through the side entrance, the smell of lilies and perfume mingling with something sharper, something metallic beneath the glitz. Inside, the halls were warm but airless, quiet but not peaceful. The kind of quiet that tells you too much has been rehearsed. We passed portraits of stern-faced ancestors, all sharing that same look of ownership, like the world belonged to them and everyone else was passing through. We climbed a short set of stairs with carpets too thick to make sound, and at the top I paused, shifting slightly out of the line of staff, letting them continue. My palms were damp against the stems of the flowers. The hall toward the bridal suites was empty except for a pair of guards stationed near the end. Their posture was militant, chin stiff, eyes unblinking. From behind the locked door, faintly, came the soft rustle of a wedding dress. I walked slowly, pretending to admire a vase on a pedestal, waiting for their attention to shift. When one guard turned slightly to check something on his earpiece, I took 3 measured steps, slipped around a decorative screen, and found myself at the back corridor, one that looped behind the bridal preparation rooms. The door there was slightly ajar, just an inch, just enough. My heart wasn't beating fast, it was beating deep like something waking in the earth. I nudged the door open with one fingertip. A soft gasp answered me. Lily stood before the mirror, veil discarded on the chair, makeup half finished. Her reflection caught mine first, wide-eyed, stunned. Then she turned, and the tightness in her shoulders cracked, just for a moment. Her lips trembled into the smallest, most fragile shape of relief. "Mom," she whispered. That voice, my daughter's voice, was thinner than thread, but it held everything she'd been hiding. I stepped inside, closing the door silently behind me. The room smelled of roses and hairspray and fear that had been sitting too long, turning sour at the edges. She rushed to me, fingers grasping my arms as if to make sure I was real. "Why are you here?" she breathed. Her eyes were filled with too many things: panic, hope, shame, longing, none of which belonged in the eyes of a bride. I touched her cheek, gently, the way I used to when nightmares clung to her. "Because you needed me," I whispered. Her chin quivered. She closed her eyes as a shudder rolled through her. "I didn't ask you to come because I didn't want them to hurt you," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. I brought our foreheads together, just like we used to when life felt bigger than both of us. "Grace," I whispered, "I'm your mother, you don't walk into fear alone." Her breath hitched, a quiet, broken sound. And in that small room, with guards waiting outside and danger threading through every wall, we stood together for the first time in months. Mother and daughter, 2 hearts trembling in the same direction. The second-floor window behind her glowed faintly with winter light, but Grace looked dimmer than the world outside. Something was terribly wrong, and I wasn't leaving without her. The dress was still hanging over the back of the kitchen chair when the light began to fade. That navy blue, it looked different in evening shadow. Softer, less like something I had bought in a crowded thrift shop, more like something that had simply always belonged in this house. The hem brushed the seat gently each time the fridge motor hummed and the floor vibrated. I stood at the sink, hands in warm dishwater gone cloudy, and let the silence settle. It wasn't the first time my daughter had made me feel small. But it was the first time she had looked afraid of a piece of fabric. On the table, the invitation lay where she had left it. Heavy paper, gold edges, the kind you don't throw away even when your heart tells you you're not welcome. I dried my hands on the dish towel and turned it over for the 100th time, tracing the embossed letters. Annual Bennett Foundation Gala. Honoring Grace Bennett and her work in community outreach. My daughter's name looked like it belonged there. Mine did not. The last of the sun slipped behind the row of houses across the street, turning their windows into small dark squares. The kitchen grew dim, the single overhead bulb humming in protest as it flickered to life. I lifted the dress from the chair and held it against me in the yellow light. The fabric smelled faintly of soap and someone else's life, lavender, maybe, and a little dust. The seams were hand-stitched, uneven in places, the way my grandmother's were when she sewed at the table long after everyone else went to bed. I smoothed my palm down the front. "This is nice," I had told Grace that afternoon, standing in her hallway, the dress still folded over my arm. "I found it for almost nothing. I thought maybe it would be enough for your big night." Her face had gone pale so quickly I thought, for a second, she might be sick. "That's a dress for poor people," she'd said, before she seemed to hear herself. Then the words broke into nervous laughter, her hand flying to her mouth. "I mean, Mama, it's not right for the event. It's very simple." Simple, I'd nodded, as if the word didn't cut. But it wasn't judgment that stayed with me now. It was the way her eyes had darted past my shoulder. The way her fingers twitched as though someone else were pulling the strings. The way she had whispered, almost to herself, "They won't understand. They, not I. Not my friends. They." I carried the dress slowly down the small hallway toward my bedroom. The carpet there was old and thin, the pattern long worn away, but it still remembered the sound of Grace's bare feet running to the bathroom on school mornings. The walls held the faint ghosts of crayon drawings I'd scrubbed away years ago. In my room, the air was cool and quiet. I laid the dress out carefully on the bedspread, smoothing the sleeves as if I were tucking in a child. On the dresser, the mirror reflected a woman with tired eyes and flowers still dusted on the edge of her sweater. My hair, shot through with gray now, was twisted up in the same way I'd worn it when Grace was small, and I had no time for vanity. "Too simple," I murmured to my own face. The woman in the mirror didn't disagree. But there was something else in her eyes too, stubbornness. The emotional hum inside me wasn't just hurt, it was worry. The kind that starts low in the stomach and spreads, slow and unavoidable, like water creeping under a door. She hadn't hugged me when I left her house. That wasn't like her. Even when she was angry, Grace had always hugged me. Awkward sometimes, quick but real. Today, she had walked me to the door with a smile that never reached her eyes, fingers clenched tight around the edge of the wood. "I'll send you the livestream link," she'd said, as if that were a kindness. "You'll see everything from home. It'll be easier." For who, I'd almost asked, but the new lines around her mouth stopped me, lines that hadn't been there last year. Lines that didn't belong on the face of a 30-year-old woman about to be honored for helping others. Now, standing in my quiet bedroom, I realized the hurt sat on top of something else. Fear. I turned from the mirror and went back to the kitchen. The invitation waited. I sat down at the table, the same table where I had taught Grace to write her name, where we'd eaten soup from chipped bowls, where we'd paid bills with coins stacked in little hopeful piles. The paper felt heavy in my hands. RSVP requested by last week. I tugged the old landline closer, the cord coiling across the table like a small worried snake. My fingers hovered over the buttons, then moved with a certainty that surprised me, not to my daughter, to the number at the bottom of the card. Bennett Foundation Office. The line rang twice before a woman answered, voice smooth and practiced. "Bennett Foundation, this is Claire speaking. How may I help you?" "Hello, Claire," I said, my voice softer than I expected. "My name is Eleanor Carter. I'm Grace Bennett's mother." There was a small pause, like a page being turned. "Oh." She said quickly, "Yes, of course. How can I help you, Mrs. Carter?" "I just wanted to confirm," I said, keeping my tone even casual. "The invitation that came for me, it's still valid." Another tiny pause. I heard typing in the background, the faint clack of keys. "Yes, your name is on the list," she said. "We have you as Eleanor Carter plus 0 guest." "Has anyone," I hesitated, "has anyone called to cancel that?" "No," she replied, brisk now. "No cancellations under your name." The room seemed to tilt a fraction. "Thank you," I said quietly. "That's all I needed." I hung up before my voice could betray me. The clock on the wall ticked, steady and indifferent. Grace hadn't told them I wasn't coming. She had told me not to, which meant someone else had asked her to keep me away, the tremor in her voice. The panic in her eyes when she saw the dress. The way she had whispered, "They won't understand," as if my presence was not just embarrassing but dangerous. I picked up the dress from the bed again, holding it against me, feeling the weight of it, the softness at the collar where the fabric had been worn by someone else's throat. It was not glamorous, it was not fancy, but it was mine. And for reasons I couldn't yet name, it suddenly felt important that I wear something that reminded me who I had been before all of this. Before money, before foundations. Before other people's expectations. Before my daughter learned to be afraid of how I looked. That night, sleep came in small, broken pieces. Each time I drifted off, I saw Grace as a little girl in her school uniform, standing at the edge of a playground, turning to see if I was still there. Back then she had wanted me close. She waved and shouted, "Mama," with her whole body. Somewhere along the way, she'd learned to lower her voice, to smooth her edges, to stand beside people who wore the right clothes and used the right words. But she was still my child, and I had not raised her to face fear alone. I woke before the alarm, the room gray with early morning. The dress hung on the back of the door now, waiting like a quiet decision. I stood in front of it for a long moment, bare feet on the cool floorboards, listening to the small sounds of the house, the heater ticking, a car passing in the street, the faint hum of the refrigerator. My heart was steady, not calm. Not unafraid, just steady. "I'll be there," I whispered, though no one was listening. "Whether she wants me or not, I'll be there." I reached for the dress, slipping it off the hanger with careful hands. Down in the kitchen, the invitation lay on the table, its gold letters catching the first light of day. I placed my car keys on top of it. The decision made no sound when it settled, but I felt it echo through every empty room. Whatever waited for me at that gala, embarrassment, rejection, or something I couldn't yet imagine, I knew one thing with sharp, quiet certainty. My daughter was afraid of more than a dress. And a mother goes where fear lives, even when she isn't invited. Especially then. The morning of the gala arrived dressed in a kind of pale, uncertain light. The kind that doesn't commit to sunrise, just hovers there, waiting to see what you'll do. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror for longer than I meant to. The navy blue dress hung on the back of the door, still carrying the faint thrift shop scent of lavender and someone else's life. I'd washed it the night before, pressing the seams myself, just the way my grandmother taught me, with the iron turned low, a thin towel between fabric and metal so the threads wouldn't shine. Now it looked almost new. Not fancy. Just honest. I touched the mirror with the tips of my fingers, leaving a soft smudge on the glass. There was a woman staring back who had weathered entire seasons of being overlooked. A woman who had learned to make herself small in rooms where her daughter now stood tall. But there was a steadiness in her eyes today. A quiet one, like winter soil that still remembers spring. I didn't feel brave. But I felt done hiding. The kettle clicked off in the kitchen, steam drifting like a ghost above the sink. I poured myself a cup of tea and held it between both hands, letting the heat settle into my fingers, into my bones. Across the table, the invitation waited like a dare. Gold lettering, thick paper, a kind of elegance that tried too hard. I traced my name again, Ms. Eleanor Carter, feeling the weight of every year Grace and I had lived under this same roof, before her world grew bigger than mine, before she started choosing different friends, different words, different versions of herself. She wasn't ashamed of me, not exactly, but she was afraid of how others would see me, and that fear, whatever its source, had begun long before the blue dress. That much I knew now. I took a slow sip of tea, letting the warmth settle the knot in my chest. Then I stood. Time to get ready. Back in my bedroom, the dress waited. I slipped it on carefully, smoothing the sleeves and tugging the waist into place. The fabric brushed softly against my skin, familiar now, like something I should have worn years ago. When I turned toward the window, the light hit the dress just so, revealing tiny hand-stitched patterns along the hem. Someone long before me had taken care to make it beautiful. I wondered who she'd been, what stories she carried, who once loved her enough to stitch a dress by hand. Clothing has memory. Some pieces feel like whispers. This one whispered, "Stand tall." By the time I stepped outside, the sky had shifted toward noon. A cool breeze threaded its way through the porch rails. The wood groaned under my feet, familiar, worn, always honest. I locked the door behind me, holding my purse close. Inside it, the invitation, a mint, a folded handkerchief, and a small picture of Grace at 12 years old, wearing her first pair of heels, wobbling proudly while gripping my arm. Her smile had been unfiltered back then. I kept the picture for courage. The car engine sputtered to life, coughing a little before settling. I eased onto the road, the town passing quietly around me, Mrs. Lorne's bakery with its fogged windows, the church steeple leaning just slightly to the left, the old school with empty swings swaying in the wind. Everything felt both familiar and far away, like I'd stepped out of my old life and into a softer version of it. My heart beat steadily, a deep, slow drum. I wasn't going for the gala. I wasn't going for the pictures or the speeches or the food I wouldn't know how to pronounce. I was going because my daughter looked afraid. And a mother goes toward fear, not away from it. The drive took 28 minutes, long enough to rethink the whole thing, not long enough to turn back. By the time I reached the event hall, a shimmering glass building that looked like a place where people wore diamonds and spoke in perfect sentences, my palms were damp. Cars lined the entrance. Men in tailored suits opened doors for women with hair that didn't dare move. Everything sparkled. I parked at the edge of the lot, watching from a distance as people walked inside, laughing lightly, brushing invisible dust from their sleeves. My heart thudded once heavy, then again. What was I doing here? I looked at the dress, then the photo in my purse, then at the building again. Just walk, I whispered, so I did. The lobby was bright enough to make me squint. White marble, golden accents, a chandelier dripping light like rain. The sound of soft music floated in the air, violins or something pretending to be. No one looked at me. No one noticed me. Until. Ma'am, name please. A woman at the check-in table smiled with perfect teeth. Her blonde hair was pinned back, not a strand out of place.